You're watching Reason and Theology Live, a show dedicated to charitable discussion, debates, interviews, commentary, and analysis. The show concentrates on theological topics, historical matters, and philosophical problems with content ranging from introductory material to in-depth examinations. And now, your host, Michael Loftus.
Welcome to Reason and Theology, everyone. Your host, Michael, on a Sunday evening, doing a debate here, moderating a debate between John Loftus. I believe this is his third time on the show, American atheist author, and our very own William Albrecht, a Catholic debater, and our, I always call him our resident debater, but also co-host. They are going to be debating the resurrection. Did Jesus rise bodily from the dead? And just to give quick outline, what we're going to do is two 15-minute openings, two 7-minute rebuttals, two 20-minute cross-examinations, two 5-minute closings, and then live Q&A. And, of course, you can also call in with your questions. I would hold off until a little bit later, but it is 1-800-484-3801 if you want to call in with your live questions. 1-800-484-3801. And if you don't want to call, again, you could just type your question in the chat, but just make sure to put it to @Reason and Theology so I know it's a question. And let me know who it's for. Is it William or is it for John? So that's what we're doing. Coming up next, the resurrection debate. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. How are y'all?
Doing good.
Doing really well. Great to be here.
John, I think this is your third time on. I want to say you debated William a couple times before.
Woo!
Yeah, so good to have you back on. William, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thrilled to be here with my friend John.
Yeah, I look forward to this. Again, it's the resurrection debate. Did Jesus rise from the dead? Bodily from the dead, I should say. William, you're going to be taking the affirmative, beginning with a 15-minute opening statement. I got my timer ready whenever you're ready. Let's dive in.
I am ashamed that I didn't have my timer open. Let me get that open.
Yeah, no worries.
It's 20-minute opening.
20-minute. Okay,
Gotcha.
Not a problem with me. Right. We can change that. You good with that, William?
I'm great.
All right, let me change my timer.
I don't think I need that much time, but...
Well, that's fine. If you don't want to use the full amount, not a problem. But let me change it to 20. And y'all do want to do two 7-minute rebuttals, two 20-minute cross exit, two 5-minute closings. Okay, good.
Still good with you, John?
Excellent. Okay.
Unless you want to reduce it to 15 minutes. I mean, if you had planned on that and I got that wrong, I'd like to know.
No, I'm perfectly fine. I mean, we can do 220. I had said 15. I thought we were going to do 15, but
15. That's fine. That's fine.
Okay.
I'll do 15. Okay, not a problem. All right, so I got my timer set for 15. Whenever you're ready, William.
I will begin now. Okay. Thank you very much for that. There are a few historical truths that we must lay down at the very start of our debate. Christ was executed by crucifixion, which is a truth shown forth in the Gospels, the New Testament writings, and the Jewish and pagan historical sources. The enemies of the Christians, such as Celsus, Marcus Fronto, Rabbi Akiba, Porphyrios, Josephus, all mention that Pontius Pilate executed Christ by crucifixion. And Lucian all attest to the historical truth that Christ was indeed crucified. All the historical evidence points to him having died by that manner. The second historical truth, and of course the one that we are talking about and debating this evening, is whether or not Christ rose from the dead, and even more so, how did he rise from the dead? Was it a mere symbolic kind of resurrection that maybe his followers thought, okay, he rose from the dead, but in a kind of spiritual, in the Western mindset, spiritual, akin to symbolic kind of manner? This debate is not about the ascension, nor is it about the inerrancy of the scriptures, although even those would be fantastic debates to talk about, but rather about whether or not Christ bodily rose from the dead, the historicity of the bodily resurrection in the earliest documents known to us. And that brings us to the examination. I want to stick to the documents that I know John very well. He's a good friend of mine, documents that he would consider like the scholars, the oldest, the ones that have the most pedigree in terms of dating. So I'm going to stick to Proto-Pauline texts, not even Deutero-Pauline texts. So the key pillar, of course, as John knows, because we can find it right here in his book, which will be under fire tonight, is found in the letters of Paul and the patristics, masterful works. The focus will be on the eyewitnesses, their accounts of the risen Christ. In 1 Corinthians, we find a tract, as Aquinas would call it, or a creed, the way some fathers put it, the way some modern day fantastic scholars put it. 1 Corinthians says, now I would remind you, brethren, in what terms I preach to you the gospel, which you received, in which you stand, by which you are saved, if you hold it fast, unless you believed in vain. For I deliver to you as of first importance what I also received, that Christ died for our sins in accordance with the scriptures, that he was buried, that he was raised on the third day in accordance with the scriptures, and that he appeared to Cephas, then to the 12. Then he appeared to more than 500 brethren at one time, most of whom are still alive, though some have fallen asleep. Then he appeared to James and all the apostles. Last of all, as to one untimely born, he also appeared to me. What must be taken into account is the historical force with which Paul puts forth this creed. As 1 Thessalonians points out, the early Christians and Jews, for that matter, held fast, meaning held consistent to divine traditions, to paradosis. This meant that they were not preserved on mere parchment or in some old dusty book, but rather that the divine tradition was taught universally and held fast to. Paul presents the historical message of the resurrection in the most important manner possible. He relays it in his writings over and over after it was already known throughout the churches of the world. How was Christ raised? Bodily or in an immaterial manner? Paul tells us that our bodies will receive life just like Christ received life. Philippians 3:21. The Lord Jesus Christ, who will change our lowly bodies to be like his glorious body by the power which enables him even to subject all things to himself. Paul's emphasis on the somati tes doxes, the glorious body, is a theme we find all throughout the Gospels as well as the book of Acts, where the sermons are replete with the teaching on the empty tomb and the bodily resurrection. In the book of Acts, we find Peter preaching on Pentecost and making a clear reference to the empty tomb of Christ. In Acts 2, we note the stark contrast between Christ and David. David was dead and buried in a grave. Christ died and was also buried in a tomb. But although the text does not directly say it, it does directly tell us David's tomb is with us in the present tense. Currently with us, Acts 2. Meaning David is still in the tomb. But Jesus experienced his resurrection. He was not abandoned to Hades. I want you to pay attention to that term. Not abandoned to Hades, nor did his flesh see corruption. He was raised up, and of that we are all martyrs. We are all witnesses. The contrast is very clear. As I said, I'll say it again. Christ is no longer in the tomb. David is. David saw his flesh corrupt. Christ did not. That the early eyewitnesses believed in a fleshly, bodily resurrection is highlighted by the usage of the Greek sarx in the passage. Literally, his flesh did not see corruption. There's no room for a Western kind of spiritual injection of a kind of spiritualized and symbolic kind of resurrection. Was the resurrection spiritual? Without a doubt it was, but the spiritual was the tangible in biblical terms. There's no way around it. If Jesus was still in the tomb, as tomb was a huge part of the theme of Peter's preaching here, if his tomb was not empty, then he indeed would have seen corruption. We find testimony even from people that doubt, that don't believe. Very famous historian, a German historian, Dr. Ludemann, is very clear that when he says it may be taken as certain that Peter and the disciples had experiences after Jesus' death in which he appeared to them as the risen Christ. Now, why are we also examining skeptics? We're looking at skeptics such as Dr. Ludemann, Dr. Bart Ehrman, who I know and John knows as well, who even though they may not be believers, they are noting and they're testifying to the fact that their eyewitnesses did not merely have hallucinations, but the eyewitnesses actually saw something. They claimed they saw the bodily risen Christ, and those that followed after them said they saw the bodily risen Christ. Bart Ehrman says, we can say with complete certainty, and I know John disagrees with this statement from Bart Ehrman, so I don't agree with everything or even 20% of what Ehrman says, but he notes that we can say with complete certainty that some of the followers of Christ at some time later insisted that he soon appeared to them, convincing them that he had been raised from the dead. He calls it a historical fact that some of the followers believed he had been raised from the dead after being executed, he says. Very, very clear words. So we don't only have believers that testify to believing in this. We even have people that are very strong intellectuals. The father of modern science, Francis Bacon, was a Christian. He emphasized the belief in the bodily resurrection of Christ. Famous scientists, Blaise Pascal, Johann Kepler, Robert Boyle, Michael Faraday, James Maxwell, Santiago Ramon, over and over, everywhere you look, you find some of the greatest intellectuals in history being devout believers, emphasizing that they believed, emphasizing that this is a historical truth. You find it all throughout the history of the beginning, since Christ died and there were eyewitnesses, people that claim to be eyewitnesses. From the very beginning, you have people defending the very truth that Christ bodily rose from the dead. Today is the feast day of Saint Apollonius. Apollonius was not afraid to die. He was very clear where he said that there is something waiting for me better, because there is eternal life that is waiting for me. Because he that is eternal life, that died on the cross and bodily rose from the dead, has given us this promise. There is something better waiting. It's a very fitting day that we have this debate, because the great Saint Apollonius, his words would shine through in today's discussion. The contrast we see, though, is one that is as well as looked at, evinced in the earliest apostolic fathers and their commentary in this passage. It's an unfortunate thing that we don't hear often about the earliest followers of Christ. We have the Bible put under intense scrutiny, and rightly so. It should be, if it can stand up to the historical test of time. It should be put under that intense scrutiny. It can stand the test of time. But you rarely hear modern day skeptics examining the figures that walked and talked the earth, that would have seen the followers of Christ, that were taught and trained by the apostles. You rarely hear about them, but they recognize the historicity, writing, some of them whose names even appear in the Bible, writing some of them before Revelation was probably even finished being penned. Clement of Rome, Bishop of Rome, made bishop by the great St. Peter, tells us in the only writing we have of his that is extant known to us, the Lord continually proves to us that there shall be a future resurrection, of which he has rendered the Lord Jesus Christ the first fruits by raising him from the dead. Ignatius' letter to the Smyrnaeans emphasizes where his heart lies, where it lay. I salute you all. Ignatius of Antioch, by the way, the incredible Ignatius who went to martyrdom, went to his death because he knew that there was hope and truth in the words of our bodily risen Lord. Went to his martyrdom to be torn apart by wild lions. Oh, to have the kind of faith that the great Saint Ignatius had. I salute you all individually and together in the name of Jesus Christ and in his flesh and blood, by his suffering and resurrection, the topic of the day, fleshly and spiritually, sarkike tai, right there, spiritually as well. So we remember the topic. Why do I emphasize that in the early church and in the Bible, the spiritual, when talking about the resurrected body, was the very real, the very tangible, because the earliest followers of Christ, when interpreting those passages, recognized that. In union with God and with you, the great Ignatius says, in fact, every single apostolic father, every single one, those philosophers, those theologians, those converts that were taught by the disciples, they taught a bodily resurrection of Christ. Remember the chain of paradosis that we talked about earlier, as Paul spoke of in 1 Corinthians, was an unbroken one. The person or scholar that says that we simply have the Gospels to rely upon will note that I didn't even have to read the Gospels today. I'm sticking to what is considered the oldest source material, but I hope we do go into the Gospels. I hope we look at them. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. The incredible historical reliability to be found in all of them, in all of the details, especially that of Matthew. We're told in my friend John's book that Matthew is just so incredible. You can't believe anything you find in there. By the time you get to Matthew, the story has evolved so much. We're going to look at whether or not that is true today, and note that the very earliest historical witnesses to the resurrection of Christ show that we have incredible testimony. We're told that there is no outside biblical testimony. We notice that there is. People seemingly are not very well aware of Clement, Polycarp, Ignatius, or conveniently choose to bypass their writings. But remember, as I pointed out to you, Clement is an individual that appears in the Bible, and Polycarp was taught by the apostles. They all were. Polycarp, as we're told by the great Irenaeus, saint and doctor of the church, would recount to him his visitations, his meetings with the eyewitnesses. How incredible is that? Individuals that were well acquainted with the apostles, both gentlemen, all of the ones we've read, Ignatius, Polycarp, Clement, aside from knowing the apostles, we're told Polycarp even knew the eyewitnesses. All of this is incredibly strong. All of this information that we are looking at, all of this information that we see is indeed mind-blowing, because we've got the biblical evidence. There's nothing fantasy-like injected into the incredible letters of Paul. There's nothing of a fantastical nature. And the reason being because Paul saw the bodily risen Lord on that Damascus road. That incredible event that turned one of the greatest persecutors of the church into one of the greatest defenders of the faith. And indeed, everything about Paul's Damascus experience. Remember, let us be very careful when we say vision. We don't mean vision in the sense of, I'm closing my eyes and having a dream. We mean vision in the sense of the very real in front of the individual. The very physical is what Paul meant. He encountered the bodily risen Christ, and he learned and was taught from the bodily risen Christ. The historical evidence points to the truth highlighted all throughout the Bible and emphasized by John, St. John, in his gospel account when he testified, destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up. And he spoke of the temple of his body. Thank you.
All right. Let me restart the timer here. 15 minutes. Whenever you're ready, John, I have it set.
Okay, thanks for having me here. Appreciate that. I find it interesting that everything that William said as evidence is testimonial evidence. There's no objective evidence, and I'll hammer on that throughout the night tonight. And it's not just a testimonial evidence. It's not like somebody sitting on a stand and we get to cross-examine them. It's hearsay, testimonial evidence, all of it, except for Paul. So if you want to hang your hat on one person's testimony, then you're a fool. And that's what I'm going to say. Not, that's what I'm going to argue. You draw that conclusion if that's how it is to be drawn. Yeah, you have Mark and you have Luke and Matthew and John, and you have other potentially credible testimonial evidence, and that's in the document called Q, which is source material for the Gospel of Mark and Matthew and Luke, the synoptics. And yet that there's in the document Q, there's no resurrection. There's also another document called the Gospel of Thomas, which might be potentially, testimonial worthy, but it's too late to be counted. But even if it were counted, there's no resurrection there. In the Gospel of Mark, the ending, beginning at chapter 16, verse 9, throughout was added by someone who plagiarized. And the reason why that was written was because there were unanswered questions about some things. And because Mark chapter 16, verse 8 leaves it in doubt as to what happened, because, the women went to the tomb and they didn't see Jesus. They saw, it says they saw an angel who said that he's risen. I mean, that's it, right? Okay, so, and when it comes to that testimony, and we have to look at the earliest, James Faraday and others, whoever you want to quote, well, he believed and he was a scientist, or even Polycarp, or Origen. Is like they weren't there. You can't count them as eyewitness testimonial evidence. So all you have is hearsay evidence from one. That's all you get. So hearsay evidence. Nothing is legitimately to be used as showing that Jesus rose from the dead, except for Paul. And in Paul, he says his vision of Jesus was a vision. And that's what he says. He's a visionary. Anybody who reads 1 Corinthians through and through will find that he sees visions. In Acts, you'll see he sees visions. It's telling him where to go, what to do, who to see, what to say. And it even says that he learned of the Lord's Supper in the vision. That's what it says. I mean, So, and in Revelation chapter 2 and 3, the author of that book had a series of revelations. Chapters 2 through 3 talks about revelations to the church. It came directly from God, you see, and so and it becomes in the text. So what you have are visions, of Paul and others, Revelation and others, and you have second hand testimonial evidence. So when it comes to an extraordinary event like a resurrection from the dead, that's just not good enough. It is something. It's not nothing. There's some kind of, there could be some testimonial, real testimonial evidence, lies behind that. That is quite possible. Jesus actually did rise from the dead. It's just that there's no reason for reasonable people to believe that he did based on the evidence. Now, you think that if God wanted to have people believe, then he would have provided much better evidence. And I showed in my book some of the kinds of things that evidence would entail. And I also am including it as a chapter in a upcoming book of mine on horrendous suffering, a whole long chapter about the kind of evidence that would count. DNA evidence, would count, and we talked about that in our debate on the virgin birth, where I talked about the kind of evidence that would count. Well, we don't have it. There's no objective evidence. Now, if I said I sank 18 holes in one on a standard golf course, you would scoff. You would not believe me, even if I was otherwise a credible person. You'd say something hit me in the head. You'd say he's on drugs. You'd say he's lying for, maybe some perverts have his daughter handcuffed to the bed and they're forcing him to say this. They would say anything but that I sank 18 holes in one in a standard golf course. Well, now that's a claim you wouldn't believe based on my testimony alone. Even if I have a couple of friends who say the same thing, I could add maybe a dozen friends, you still wouldn't believe it. Maybe you might start believing it at about 50 friends. Camera would change everything. Something we don't find in the Gospels. But if I said I also took up wings and I flew from T to T as I sank my 18 holes in one, now that's the kind of claim we're talking about when we're talking about a resurrection. And if you wouldn't believe my claim to have sank 18 holes in one on a standard golf course, you would certainly not believe my claim that I flew of my own power, wings or what have you, or like Superman somehow does, from T to T as I did that. You wouldn't believe me. You wouldn't believe a half a dozen people. You wouldn't believe 100 people. Maybe you might believe it with a TV camera on scene. I mean, maybe you wouldn't. Maybe you say that's too incredible to even believe that there wasn't some kind of editing going on. So you would not believe that sort of stuff. So when I say I don't believe, I'm being very reasonable. The only testimony that we have are the earliest testimonies, and Mark and Q and the Gospel of Thomas do not have resurrection scenes, and Paul is a visionary, clearly a visionary, like the book of Revelations and the others who had the spirit of prophecy, the spirit of knowledge, the spirit of wisdom, who spoke in tongues and which were somehow whatever the languages or not. I think they're purported to be languages in the Gospel. See, in the book of Acts, chapter 2, which is crazy talk, So this kind of stuff happened in the first century church, and there's no reason to think that Paul wasn't one of them. So it's a clear-cut case. The evidence does not support Jesus resurrecting from the dead, spiritual, whatever that might mean, or objective or otherwise. What we have is a clear, ancient case of the same phenomena that we know from the Mormon church. It's clear. The Mormon church believed Joseph Smith had some visions and had golden plates because of some testimonies, 12 of them, I guess, including himself. And we don't know enough about the New Testament people to be able to discredit the New Testament people like we can with the Mormon people, because the Mormon people have a trail of evidence, have a trail of letters, have a trail of people who were known and not known as liars or thieves or benefactors of Joseph Smith. We read about the disciples, early disciples, as gospel, cameo appearances from them. I mean, we really don't know that much about Thomas. Even if he did, which he couldn't have said what he said in the Gospel of John. I'll tell you why. But we have nothing else, and even at that, the story about doubting Thomas in the Gospel of John is not doubting Thomas's story. It's Gospel of John's story. It's told through the Gospel of John. We have no reason to think that the doubting Thomas guy ever existed. Only that the Gospel of John decided, well, we need better evidence than what we have, so let's include this story, and maybe we'll get people to believe. But the crazy thing about believing the story that doubting Thomas saw Jesus and said, "My Lord and my God," is that it says, so therefore, blessed are those who see, and who believe, even though they haven't seen. Well, again, they're asking us to believe based on not seeing, because not seeing is the whole sum and summation of the gospel story itself. We have to believe based on things we have not seen. Now that's crazy, but apparently the story of doubting Thomas was told in the Gospel of John because that's all they have. You haven't seen, so it's a virtue to believe. I don't find that to be a virtue at all. I find belief without evidence a vice. And the Gospel of John tells us exactly what's going on in the Gospels, in the New Testament. There is no objective evidence for Jesus rising from the dead, no matter what somebody had said in the 2nd century or the 3rd century or the 4th century. Jesus is dead. He stayed dead. And that's because that's all we can conclude from the evidence. I don't know if I have any more time left.
Yes, you had about 5 minutes there, but not a problem. Yeah, go ahead and reset the clock. Actually, I'm going to change it to 7 minutes here because now y'all have a rebuttal beginning with you, William. I'm almost set. 1 second, though. Okay. I'm ready when you are, William.
I am ready, and I will begin now. Thank you very much for that, John. We were told that everything is hearsay except for Paul. Well, his account was the only resurrection one that I read. It was the only one that I read. I recognize that comes from John. I've read John's book. I do my homework. I've read it multiple times. In fact, in case John doesn't remember, he gave it to me in person and signed it for me. I've read it. That is why I stuck with Paul. And that account is the one that we're going to have to deal with today, because Paul is very, very clear that there were over 500 witnesses of the bodily risen Christ. It wasn't spiritual in the sense of a modern Western kind of spiritual. It was bodily. We have evidence of that. We have massive historical evidence. Now, are you asking for cell phone video or camcorder evidence or a Polaroid picture from back in the time of Paul? If that is the kind of evidence that you want, then, well, there's a lot of things that we can doubt even existed. You want to doubt the existence of Josephus, Pontius Pilate? Do you want to doubt the existence of Constantine the emperor? I mean, and on and on. We can go on and on of historical events which historians very strongly believe in and defend. We hear about the Q source. Well, read it for us. You know that you're talking about hearsay. That's a bunch of hearsay. But here's the problem with utilizing Q. How can there be a resurrection account in Q if we're told by all the scholars it's the account of Christ's actual sayings and his words? And you want a resurrection account there? We're told, though, by all the scholars of Q, that if it existed, it was used at Easter celebrations of the church. So much for that conundrum to deal with. The ending of Mark added, we're told. I didn't even utilize Mark. But if John wants to have a debate on the longer ending of Mark, I'd be more than glad to set that up for him. Be more than glad to. We're told that Polycarp, Origen, and all these others weren't eyewitnesses. I didn't bring Origen up. I think John is still having flashbacks from our previous debate when I did bring Origen up. I didn't bring him up today. Brought Polycarp up because we're told directly by his disciple that taught and trained him that Polycarp recounted to him. Imagine sitting down at a campfire talking to one of the ones that was trained by the apostles, taught and trained by them, that you knew he went to his martyrdom for the very truth of Christ, recounted to him that he saw and dialogued with many an eyewitness. We are told that in 1 Corinthians, Paul received the Lord's Supper in a vision. I am shocked. That's fantastic. This is new information that is being given to me. And it's a masterclass for me. I can't wait for John to show me where it is, because I guarantee you we're going to go and look at 1 Corinthians 10 and 11 in a little bit. I better get shown where that is in a vision. But I know I've heard that. It does get brought up in his book as well. So we're going to look at it. We're told that you can't trust John, the Revelator. Okay, I didn't even bring the book of Revelation up. A totally different topics. They're totally different debates. Again, none of the actual meat and potatoes of the evidence that was brought up was actually dealt with. We're told that, well, you know what? He said that these were visions. Where? Give us the actual proof rather than the mere hearsay. You catch that? We're told that we're being only told this. People could have gone and people could have looked and people could have discredited Paul when Paul said over 500 eyewitnesses were appeared to. And you're telling me that he believed that he had a visionary appearance of Christ? In what way? He says that Christ even appeared to him. There's nothing of the text utilized in the book of Acts chapter, I think it's 2 and 9. I don't remember exactly where, but I've got it here in my notes. Either which way, we can look and examine it. There's nothing there that would indicate that this was a mere vision. If it was a mere vision, think about it. How would the other individuals have been affected? Because they're affected in some way. And all of the commentators, modern day, ancient of antiquity, note that they were. Yet we're told that was a mere vision. Paul is very clear. He even appeared to me. Why would he, if he appeared bodily to Paul, why would he have to then give him the Lord's Supper in a vision? Where are we told this was given to him in a vision? I know where it is. It's 2 Corinthians. But it's not there either. I know where the claim lies. I know where the claim lies, or Galatians. It's not there either. In none of them. We have to examine the text in a critical fashion. We heard of doubting Thomas. I didn't even bring him up. I didn't even read the Gospel of John. And the whole idea of well, you know what, you should believe without any evidence at all. That's not the point. The point is that Thomas, with all of the evidence, with everything being told to him, with people that knew the bodily risen Christ, that believed in the prophecies of old, that the prophecy had come to fulfillment, he still doubted. He even doubted when Christ appeared to him, unless he was allowed to touch. That is the point of the text of Doubting Thomas. Not that we're being told to be buffoons and morons. Oh, you know what? Be buffoons. There's really no evidence. No, there is evidence. We're told that anything outside of Paul doesn't hold water. Well, we can stick to Paul, the Pauline text, and the very language utilized in 1 Corinthians were told by people that existed, because guess what? The Christian community didn't vanish after the biblical era closed. They kept living. There were people taught and trained by the apostles. How else would the church have persevered? Taught and trained. Do you think that they only believed by mere, well, you know what? We believe that Paul, he said that, so maybe it was true. We have no evidence. Irenaeus tells us otherwise. The massive amount of historical testimony tells us otherwise. We heard about golf courses as well. We can hope John will do better at golf than he's going to do examining the biblical and historical text tonight. But I look forward to examining that text. Thank you.
All right. I have reset the timer. John, are you ready?
Yeah.
All right. Go ahead.
Yeah. He said, William said, there's no outside testimony. You see, there's outside testimony to the resurrection, or there's outside testimony to Jesus in the current literature of that day. But my claim is that there's no present day outside testimony to the resurrection that we can accept. There is no current contemporary. There is outside testimony to the resurrection. There's none. I mean, all you have is the gospel and itself. So that's important. What we're looking for is the earliest testimony. Like he mentioned Polycarp. See, we really don't know anything about Polycarp. Someone said he was a disciple of John, but we have disciples of Joseph Smith. I mean, are you going to say because Joseph Smith had a disciple or two, or started a church based on his visions, that anybody after Joseph Smith's testimony supports his testimony? Are you going to say that, well, let's say Elijah, the guy named Elijah, believed Joseph Smith, and so therefore it must be true what Joseph Smith said? No, you got this wrong. You've got this absolutely dead wrong. The only person that we need to be investigating would be Joseph Smith himself, and the only persons we should be investigating are the very first people who saw Jesus and raising from the dead. Now, William assumes Jesus raised from the dead. That's basically what it is. He assumes it's true because he was raised to believe that way in the Christian culture. There's no reason he would believe it as a rational human being if told the story for the first time. I know that people do believe it upon hearing it for the first time. I get that. Around the world, I get that. But I'm saying he wouldn't be reasonable to believe it for the first time if all the evidence he had was one person who saw a vision of Jesus. Now, he certainly wasn't there when Jesus rose from the dead. And the Gospel of Thomas story is an invented one. If ever there was an invented story in the Gospels, that is it. Because it was concocted to convince people that they should believe without evidence. That's why it's concocted. Apparently, it wasn't good enough just to tell a story. They had to have that story too, because otherwise, because Thomas and his alleged experience with Jesus isn't anything different than merely other stories we read in the Gospel of John. They're all the same. They all have the same evidential weight. Every story in the Gospel of John has the same evidentiary weight. It says that Jesus rose Lazarus from the dead in the Gospel of John. That's what it says. Well, that's a story. Where's Lazarus? I want to interview him. I want to cross-examine him. I want to see what he thinks about heaven and how. And what did God talk to him when he was in heaven? Did he go to heaven? We don't get any of that, you know. And the same thing with the story of Thomas in the Gospel of John. It carries no more evidential weight than any other story in the Gospel of John. So to include it by saying these things are told to you that you might believe without seeing, it's a clear indication that the Gospel of John is more interested in producing belief that is convincing others than he is in producing the objective evidence. And the rest, I mean, really, that's it. So no one would believe this tale if it was just told by Paul, no more than we should believe Joseph Smith's story. And it doesn't matter if there's a Polycarp, it doesn't matter if there's an Elijah. A testimony like that doesn't count, and everything else is hearsay testimony. Now, William says about the 500 brothers who saw Jesus, you know, we don't get to test, we don't get to cross-examine them. 500 is a really nice round number. Why didn't Mark include that, you know, in his later gospel, right? Why didn't Matthew or Luke pick up on it, or the Gospel of John pick up on it? They didn't. There must be a reason. And that is, they couldn't verify it. You know, I mean, let's give them some kind of credit. The gospel writers couldn't verify that, so they didn't include it. Well, bully for them. But that's what we should do as well. So there's really, and besides, that isn't actual evidence to say there are 500 people. Even to the Corinthians, they couldn't check it out either. I'm not saying he made things up. I don't know where he heard it. Maybe he heard it from some kind of myth or something like that. But did he know them personally? I mean, it's just really bizarre to say that's evidence or anything else that William has said in this discussion. Now, William says, now all the commentators say this and all the commentators say that. Well, that's, again, doing nothing more than special pleading his case. He believes and he wants to find out what kind of things he can pull into to buttress his belief. But it all comes down to belief. He's nothing more than believing the Doubting Thomas story, because that's the only thing they have, and that is to believe based on nothing but belief itself. There's no hard evidence. There's no historical evidence. Now, he says, well, we can't, historical sources, we might just believe all other historical sources. Well, only those that can't be corroborated. I mean, like, we're talking about the difference between sinking 18 holes in one and sinking 18 holes in one and flying from T to T. Now, historical sources would be we would talk about the hole in one here, or the hole in one there, or maybe two hole in ones. And I don't think any historical source would have 18 holes in one type of a story. I mean, if they did, we wouldn't believe it. But we can believe historians to that same degree, see? But not the miraculous kind of things. We have to look for the same kind of evidence we would look as other events are told to us in the ancient past. And, virgin births, are a dime a dozen back then. And miracles are just everywhere in the ancient world. It seems like to me the best thing to do is just to suspend judgment, if nothing else. Suspend judgment. Now, I think you should go on beyond that, but suspend judgment until you have the evidence. William is not into that. In fact, he's willing to debate it. He's such a fool for Jesus, and probably proud of it.
All right, so let's see. I'm going to set the timer here to 20 minutes. We're going to do 2 20-minute cross-examinations, beginning with you, William. Okay, I am set whenever you are.
Thank you for that, John. John, let's go right into it. I've heard you use this argument a lot, and I want to examine it. Where do we have the Lord's Supper being told to us that Paul received via vision?
Well, get out your Bibles. It's 1 Corinthians.
I got it out. 1 Corinthians 11. For I received from the Lord that which I also delivered to you, that the Lord Jesus died and onward. Where does he say he received this in a vision?
Well, he does. And if you want to take the time to read it all, I encourage you to do that.
For I received from the Lord that which I also delivered.
You can stop.
I received from the Lord. Oh, that okay. Where in the Greek does that indicate vision?
I'm sorry?
Where in the Greek does the receiving of something indicate vision?
Well, listen. Look, if you want to say for 1 second here to win a debate, and which is I know you're interested in doing,
I'm going to win it.
That he doesn't say received, then you take that up with the Greek scholars. I don't have that Greek text in front of me right now, but I assure you that's what all the scholars, all commentators, let me re-quote your own phrase back to you, say, he says.
So I know what the commentators say. I've talked to my friend, our mutual friend, Bob Price, that he does make that argument as well. But you have the Greek word.
The reason why if he does anything there, what he's doing is he's contrasting what Paul said in Galatians chapter 1, where in Galatians chapter 1, he says, I did not receive this from anyone but the Lord. And in 1 Corinthians 15, Paul says, I received this from the Lord. So there's a little bit of a contradiction between 1 Corinthians and Galatians 15. That's where Paul Price is talking about. Right
now, we'll go to Galatians 1 and we'll look at that. But in 1 Corinthians 11,
you can until you answer for me why I should believe anything Paul says. Well, I'm not. You're like quoting Galatians and Corinthians. That's all testimonial evidence. It's all. It doesn't really matter. He's talking about a person who got up out of the grave.
I'm quoting your book. I'm quoting your book. I'm not quoting anything else. I'm quoting your book.
When you do, of course.
Well, then we're about to look at paralabon is the Greek word for received. I'm going to ask you one more time, then we'll move over to something else. Does that word indicate vision? Does anything in 1 Corinthians 11 indicate he received it as a vision, or is that your interpretation of the text?
All right. If you want to turn this into a Greek lesson, then you're the one about to be schooled. We're talking about a vision.
Give it your best. Right, let's see that.
Here we go.
Look forward to that.
Acts chapter 26.
Oh, hold on. I'm asking you about 1 Corinthians 11. We can move to Acts in a bit. It's my cross-examination. So,
it's your cross?
Sure is. In 1 Corinthians 11, and you can give me that wonderful schooling that I look forward to in your cross-examination. In 1 Corinthians 11, where on earth is the Greek word or anything here that indicates this was a mere vision?
Look, you have to look at the context. All right. I'm going to tell you. You have to look at the context of what's being said. And we find in Paul's writings all kinds of sentences. Oh, here we go.
Well, where's the one in 1 Corinthians 11, which you've been bringing up for well over a decade, John, and you included in your book? Where is it in 1 Corinthians 11?
But you have to look at the context.
I've got it open.
In Paul and elsewhere, he talks about visions. He talks about where he had a plurality of visions. And
but the word vision is not used.
Jesus the Lord. He says at one point, "I tell you, but not the Lord, but I tell you." So he has a distinction between the two.
John, in 1 Corinthians 11, John,
talk about visions.
John, in 1 Corinthians 11, there is nothing there about vision. Do you concede that point? Yes or no?
Oh yeah. In the context of Paul's writings and Revelation chapter 2 verses 3.
Okay.
When Revelation chapter 2:3 talks about I received from the Lord, it's the same thing.
Let's move on to another question.
You can split hairs, but where else did he receive it if it wasn't a vision or a dream? I don't care which.
You can ask me that in your cross-examination. Thank you for conceding that point. In your book, you bring up and you argue that it was not bodily according to the apostles. And in your book, in the resurrection chapter, it's a good promo for your book. People need to get it. Where you tell the audience, you tell people, well, you know what? It was spiritual in the symbolic Western kind of sense. But we've got in the Greek, katagraphe, according to the scriptures, he rose from the dead. Where in the Old Testament is resurrection anything other than bodily?
I know what you're doing. You got gotcha moments. You know, you wouldn't dare.
No, you have time to go deeper. This is not a gotcha moment. I'm reading from the book.
I've made you enough times to know that you never address the real question. You always talk about some one. Look, I used to know the Bible a lot better than I do now. I don't know it as well. I mean, I don't regard it as the Word of God enough to bother with it. So, I don't know. I don't know whether it is or it isn't. You know, I mean, I have to get back with it.
Let me kind of narrow. Let me narrow this down. I want people to realize I don't want any kind of gotcha moment. So let's kind of tease it out a little bit. Are you aware, or do you think there's anywhere in the Old Testament where resurrection is not of the bodily nature?
In the Old Testament,
right? Because he's saying according to the scriptures, katagraphe, and you admit yourself in your book that he's referring to the Old Testament.
Well, just 1 second here. Let me comment on this.
Sure.
Tell me which scriptures predict a resurrection of Jesus, because
that's fantastic, but you're going to have to get to that in your cross-examination, not mine.
No, I will, but why isn't that relevant? Where is there a prediction of a resurrection in the Old Testament?
But you know what? I'm going to throw you a lifeline, John. Isaiah 52 to 53, we're going to examine it right now. So I'm going to turn that into a cross-examination question for me. Since you feel that is a strong point, Isaiah 52 and 53, we read of, and that's only one area, we read of the suffering servant that dies. Is that not a prophecy of the Messiah?
No, it's a description of Israel and their sufferings in 2nd Isaiah, which is clearly about the Israelites, because of Isaiah chapter 49 verse 3, where it specifically says, "My suffering servant Israel." Now, it's a whole context throughout those few chapters there, that what they're talking about is something currently going on and the sufferings of the Jew. Now, I remember in my master's class on Isaiah for when I learned Hebrew at Lincoln Christian University, I remember looking at that particular passage and particular question, that is whether or not the servant in Isaiah was Jesus or not, and it's clear that it's not. Now, I said that as a Christian. It's about the people
John,
of Israel.
You do recognize that Israel is also a proper name that is given within the Bible, right? Not merely speaking about the people of God. In the book of Genesis, we have that as well. The Messiah is called Israel. You do recognize that, right?
The Messiah is called Israel.
That's correct.
I don't think so.
You don't recognize it. Okay.
You know what?
Even
if you're right, no, really, even if you're right, who cares about this minutia? Go.
Apparently you care, because you wanted to ask me that question. So Isaiah 52 to 53, we read of somebody who's being, we read of some, you're right. How can it be about the nation of Israel if it's about a person that is dying for the sins of Israel? Tell me that.
There was no concept of a substitutionary death in those days. This is fostered. Here's what happened. The early believers thought they saw Jesus in the visions or dreams or what have you, and so they read into their Old Testament things that might, in some way or fashion support what they believe. And they made stuff up. They found things that weren't there, and the servant sounded like a good story, and so they used it in their own purposes, and they quoted them in several Gospels. And
John, in Isaiah 52 to 53, is the oldest Jewish interpretation a messianic one? Yes or no?
Suffering servant, the oldest interpret what?
Is the oldest interpretation of Isaiah 52, 53 Jewish interpretation? Because I recognize that you don't care what the Christians say or what have you. What about the earliest Jewish interpretation? Did they view Isaiah 52 or 53 as messianic? Yes or no?
Well, they didn't see it in Jesus, and that's because.
But I'm not asking about Jesus. I mean, you asked for an Old Testament.
It's really important that you get this point.
But you wanted an Old Testament.
It rejected Jesus because the Old Testament did not point to Jesus that you believe in.
I know they rejected him. You claimed that there is no Old Testament prophecy of a suffering Messiah. So I'm asking you one more time. Is the oldest Jewish interpretation of Isaiah 52:53, not even Christian, is the oldest Jewish interpretation messianic? Yes or no?
No.
Yes, it is. You're incorrect.
It comes into play. The whole idea of a Messiah comes into play when Jeremiah chapter 25, verse 11, he talks about 70 years for them to be restored, and a Messiah will come. And the first in
Targum Jonathan on Isaiah 53, behold, my servant Messiah shall prosper. He shall be high and increase and be exceeding strong as the house of Israel. Notice how he distinguishes the person of Isaiah with the house of Israel. This is an ancient Jewish interpretation. How can you tell me? I just read it for you. What are you talking about? I'm reading it for you.
It's only after the destruction of Jerusalem where they were looking for us, or during, or before.
Give me something before.
The whole idea of a Messiah arose when the Jews were being destroyed and being assaulted, and they sought for a Messiah, and they all of a sudden universalized the Messiah as time went on. So that was not current with Isaiah.
Then give me a Jewish source. I provided one. Give me a Jewish source that says that this is not referring to a future Messiah. Do you have one?
Isaiah itself says so. Isaiah 49, verse 3. Would you read that?
You cannot use the very verse being disputed as evidence, John. Come on. You know better than that. So I'm going to take it that you can't provide any evidence.
If you're looking for what Isaiah 49 through 53 is saying, yes, indeed, you must look at Isaiah 49.
In Isaiah 52 and 53, do we have the suffering servant dying and then continuing to live? Yes or no?
The Jews were dying. The Jews were being assaulted and tortured and whipped and chained, and they were nailed up.
Answer that for me. Does the suffering servant die yet continue to live? Yes or no?
No.
It says that he's cut off from the land of the living, yet his days are prolonged. How do you answer that?
Just exactly what it says. Look, the Jews were cut off.
How can he die?
The Jews were cut off from the land, and yet they continued to survive because they were given a remnant. After the Babylonian captivity, they came back to their land. What's the problem?
And yet, the problem is you cannot give me not even one ancient Jewish interpretation that sides with you. Yet I've given you one, and I can provide you many ones. You can't even give me one Jewish one. Rather, you're saying, well, look at the text. How can you use that as evidence? The very text being debated.
Look, here's your basic error. You want to talk about Polycarp, not Paul.
I didn't bring it up right now, though.
And you want to talk about a Targum, not the original text itself.
Oh, we're talking about the original text.
In
the original text, this figure dies. He's disfigured, dies, yet he prolongs his days. We're not told that the people, it is a singular person, John. You can't deal with that text. But I'm going to move on to another question.
No, I already did. It's a text of suffering and death by the people of Israel. And
you can't provide any evidence for that. So you got to provide evidence. Isaiah 49:3 is using,
please.
Yes, it's using a proper name, Israel. The way Genesis uses that proper name, Israel, it's talking about a singular person.
So you refuse to read that.
I read it already, John. So since you can't give me an ancient source, let's move on. On your blog and in your multiple times you've done this. You didn't give me any. Multiple times you bring up Romulus. I love this one. You say you posted a blog story a few days. By the way, I read your blog. I enjoy it. A few days ago, some gentleman that talked about his Easter Epiphany. All of the likenesses of Romulus with Christ. And I read stuff you've written about that before. Where, pray tell, John, where is the evidence of Romulus dying and resurrecting?
Look, all right. I want listeners to notice what's going on here. He can't provide objective evidence, and so he's talking about commentators this and commentators that. Look, you can say you've read my book all you want, but you don't believe. You believe, and that's all there is to it. So you have blind faith. You're like the doubting Thomas. You're just like him. Yeah, you can read the book and still not be swayed because of the reasons and evidence. because you have blind faith because you were raised to believe, and I can't do anything about that. So you can't say I've read your book, so therefore, and I still believe, so therefore everybody should be just like me. You're just offering another doubting Thomas story.
Are you aware? And I'm going to press on with this question. Are you aware, despite what you claim, that there is absolutely no source that claims that Romulus was resurrected in a glorified body? Yet on your webpage, you say, like Christ, there are post-death translation appearance accounts with eyewitness testimony of Romulus. I would like for you to give the audience a few of them.
Osiris.
Romulus. We're talking about Romulus. We're talking about Romulus.
Look, I don't write anything about Romulus. If you want to debate Romulus and Remus, you have Richard Miller on. He's the expert. He's written a book on the resurrection called Resurrection and Inception. I think that's the name of it. Richard C. Miller. He is the foremost scholar on the resurrection, and he will wax your hide.
I'd like to see that. Okay,
look. You don't get it. I don't have to know about that. I mean, I do, Tom. You
brought up. Since you can't answer Osiris, we're going to go. Well, you can't answer Romulus. Let's go to Osiris because that came up when we were talking over there. Listen, you brought up Osiris.
What you're trying to say is that uniqueness is special. That since if Jesus rose from the dead is a unique claim, that therefore it must have more evidence for it. But unique claims are not evidence of nothing, of anything. I should say anything.
That is why it's so important. That is why it's so important, because it's not a unique claim. You claim it's not a unique claim. That's why you brought up Osiris. Where on earth do we read of Osiris? No, I didn't. Where do we read of Osiris being resurrected? Where does he resurrect?
Would you please offer some substantive critique of what I said and not just skirt about this and skirt about that and distract from this and distract that the minutia?
Answer me where Osiris resurrects from the dead.
About the lack of objective evidence. Would you please?
You can't do it. So then let's move to another one. John, this is a roasting. This is a roasting. I better pull out the marshmallows, my friend, because you're not answering anything for me. Let's continue. Let's go. Where on earth does Paul utilize Greek language that says it's a mere vision for him? Show me where.
Well, I just didn't I read
Let's
that?
Look at you told the audience you're going to give me a schooling on Greek. Here is your time to do it. Where's the vision?
I've got 1 minute 16 seconds left, and I'm pretty sure you're going to take up the rest, at least half of it.
No, because you have 20 minutes right now. After this, you have 20 minutes.
It's not.
No, you're right. You're right. But I'm not going to take up all the time. So tell me where. Let's look at it. Acts where?
Well, now there's 1 minute left, and I'm sure you're going to use at least 30 seconds of that. In Acts chapter 16, or Acts chapter 26, verse 19, after recounting his experience to King Agrippa, Paul says, "So King Agrippa, I did not prove disobedient to the heavenly vision." That's it's the noun form of opthea. It's a vision.
Where on earth is ophthe only a vision? Where? Ophthe is used for the tangible, for the actual physical. Show me where ophthe is used for a vision.
You want to use up your seconds? Go ahead. But what else could it be? What I was not to the heavenly vision.
He saw something physical.
He says in Galatians chapter 1 that he received what he knows from the Lord himself. Yes, what else could it be?
It was a bodily appearance. Ophthe does not mean spiritual in the modern Western mindset, John.
Okay, let's reset the timer here. John, you now have 20 minutes to cross-examine William whenever you're ready.
Well, the reason our debates are feisty, and this one in particular, is because I'm tired of letting him get away with crap. And so
now it's time to put me under the fire. Then you got me now.
Yeah. Well, you know,
for the audience to know, John and me are friends. We've debated numerous times. Let the audience know. We don't hate each other.
We are.
Yeah, I don't want the audience to think that we're mean with each other.
No, we're not.
For people that people that are watching, John's my friend. We talk often. We text often.
I just don't like.
You don't
your
like
debating.
losing.
I think your debating tactics are disingenuous. I don't think you're honestly debating me. I think what you're doing is you believe, and so you're coming up with minutiae. Sorry.
But John, you've been telling me that. But you've been telling me that for about almost a decade. I don't think it's minutia, because when we look at these actual terms, I really, my friend, I think they're very important, because if we recognize that what you think is minutia is very important language that shows that Jesus bodily rose from the dead, I think it means the world for Christians that tune in. I don't think it's just minor little details. I really don't. I think what you think is really tiny evidence, I think is very important. Like the Greek word ophthe, it's not used for merely simply visionary accounts alone. That you think is minutia. I think that's very important.
All right, let's talk about. I'm going to read to you something that you've read, because it's in my book, and then see what you have to say about it. Paul and the early church are best known as visionaries. Are visionaries. They see dreams. In dreams, they see Jesus. Joseph, for instance, Mary's husband, was convinced that Mary was pregnant with the God's child by a dream. It says so very emphatically. It says so in Matthew 1.
Yeah, the Greek for dream appears there. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then in Joel chapter 2, it talks about your young men will see visions. And in 1 Corinthians, I think it's 12, they talk about the divine knowledge, prophecy, tongues. The book of Acts describes several of Paul's visions in chapter 16, 18, 22, 23.
What page of your book are you on? What page of your book are you on?
I just printed it out.
Okay, I thought you had your book.
This is a lot easier to handle, that's all, rather than turning through pages.
Sure. I'm with you there. By the way, to your credit and to your help, I purchased your book electronic as well. I prefer going through online reading there.
Thank you, by the way, for that. In Galatians 2:2, Paul, there's another vision. Paul repeats several revelations that he passed down to the church in 1 Corinthians 2, 7, and 14. He even says he learned about the Lord's Supper from the Lord himself, which we talked about. One can easily envision how all manners of rulings and doctrines could have emerged on such a basis, and in time be ascribed not to the risen Jesus, but to the earthly Jesus. The Revelation, the author talks about visions too. But the early church believed in divine revelation, divine inspiration. I mean, the authors of the New Testament were supposedly inspired. The dreams, the visions. There was just a lot of places you find them, and Paul was one of those. We find that. I mean, the evidence is obvious, right? So
let me answer that for you.
Come to Macedonia. He's told in a vision, and Ananias has said in a vision, "Go meet Paul Saul, because he's one of the good guys now." So
let me touch upon that because I know you're cross-examining. Okay, go ahead. Go ahead.
And I've already mentioned the Doubting Thomas story, which is it can't possibly have happened. And it's mainly told just to create belief from gullible people, because a non-gullible person would look at that story and say, wait, I haven't met Thomas. Why is his experience the same as mine? Why is that considered objective for me?
Before we go into Thomas, so let's deal with what you read of 1 Corinthians 11.
It's all part of the same thing. And the question is, with that as a basis for believing Jesus rose from the dead, Paul in particular, but the early church as well, why should any reasonable person believe because of Paul? And that's the only testimony we have. That's the only possible testimony we have that could lead us to think Jesus rose from dead. I see none. I see no reason.
Okay, let me answer that. Looking at Paul alone, even sticking to Paul alone and looking at people that followed after Paul, people that were part of the church after Paul, that testified to all of the evidence that Paul presented, that in and of itself is a fantastic reason to believe. Excuse me. But another very good reason is when we can know that he bodily rose from the dead, because whenever visions are occurring, we're literally told it's a vision. Like when he says, I received this in a vision, or I received this in a dream, we know that those are not of the non-physical nature, depending on the grammar and the context. The problem is Galatians 1 doesn't say he received it in a vision. 1 Corinthians 11 doesn't say he received it in a vision either. None of them say that. He is talking about having received it from Christ. Corinthians, hold on, wait, let me finish that. 1 Corinthians 11, he says he received it from Christ. There's nothing indicative of a mere vision. So in 1 Corinthians 15, what I've argued...
all right, now explain to me this. It's my question. How else was he to have received it?
Let me answer.
How else could he have gotten it?
I believe that...
Not from the Old Testament, and you know that. And Jesus was already gone and ascended into heaven, and you got that. How else, when he says, I received the Lord, how else do you expect him to have received it?
Because in 1 Corinthians 15, he tells us he appeared. He's talking about bodily appearances. He appeared to the 500, to Cephas, to John, then to me. He believed that he appeared to him as well. Christians, hold on. No, John, it's not a vision. There's nothing indicative of a vision there. All of the language is indicative of the physical. So he's talking about having gotten it from the Lord. If you look at, hold on, let me finish my sentence, John. I know what modern day scholars say. And I had this debate with our mutual friend, Bob Price. And even Bob said, hey, it's possible grammatically. He said that. All of the ancient early philosophers and theologians said he received it from Christ. 1 Corinthians 11, he got the Lord's Supper from Christ. In 1 Corinthians 15, he got that from Christ as well. I don't believe he got it from, I know he went and he was taught and trained by Peter, historicized that Greek word. I believe that this was received from the Lord, from Christ. And everything in the Greek text would also lead you to believe, would not lead you to believe otherwise.
Well, I got distracted here by my wife, but and that's a pleasant distraction. But I don't understand how that's relevant to my question. I mean, I respect Bob
because you talked about visions, John. You talked about visions and said they were not reliable. I'm telling you, they're not visions. You got it from Christ.
All right, look, they are not real. All right, if you're going to trust visions, then tell me why you trust Paul him and not Joseph Smith's.
Very, very good question. Maybe because Paul actually saw the risen Christ. Joseph Smith comes. Wait. John,
it's a vision.
John, I'm not done answering. No, it's not a vision. There's nothing about the Greek word there that indicates that it was a mere vision. It is. He uses the Greek word. No,
it's the same word that we read about.
No, you're wrong.
It's the same word.
In one, John.
That I read from Acts chapter 26. What verse was that?
Okay.
Yeah, earlier.
What Paul is doing here, I'm going to tell you what he's doing.
And you know that. If you don't,
no, John. He's quoting from Exodus 17:4. If you look at what he's doing there, he's talking about the rock. And if you look at it, if you go to 1 Corinthians 10, all ate of the spiritual meat, all ate of the drank of the spiritual drink. They follow the spiritual rock that was Christ. All of that is of the physical nature. That conversation continues in 1 Corinthians 11, the very same Greek word. I don't know what's funny. The food that they ate? Are you telling me that they ate food that was made out of air?
They didn't eat food. They didn't eat food. They didn't eat miraculous food. And here's why. It's like saying I sank 18 holes in one air golf course.
Even if you don't believe they ate food, they're talking about something that that was physical, that was tangible, that they could hold. So that is why it wasn't a vision. But let me answer you why I wouldn't believe in Joseph Smith. He comes many years disconnected from Jesus Christ. I believe Paul, because Paul is contemporaneous to Christ, because there are people that testify to all of this being true that were contemporaries of the apostles. They were taught
being contemporary with Christ.
Let me finish. The reason I believe them is because they were taught and trained by the apostles. We're told they saw the eyewitnesses.
Paul says he didn't receive his message from the apostles. He didn't receive it for the church in one passage.
Thank you very much. He did. I agree with you. He got it from Christ. I agree. He says that he did not get it from flesh and blood. I agree with you. Well,
just like he got the Lord. Just like he got the Lord.
Actually, no. Flesh and blood cannot enter the kingdom of heaven. My bad.
All right. All right, he got the Lord's Supper from Jesus, just as the book of Revelation got its revelations from God. And John, just as look, there are Old Testament prophets.
Can't deal with the grammar of 1 Corinthians.
There's 11. Isaiah. There's and other Amos, Zechariah. They all begin with the phrase, "And the Lord spoke to me." I mean, not all of them. I mean, I'd have to say half of the prophets begin by saying, "The Lord spoke to me," or the Lord used me. Right?
Good for them, because tonight we're talking about
every one of those books. Every one of those books in the Old Testament, right? That say that somewhere along the line.
And many of them believed that the Lord appeared before them.
Are you kidding me? This is like Joseph Smith all over again, and you don't get it. It's like
I realize
you don't get it.
Well, you know, it's quite insulting to the Jews as well there, John. That's quite, because the Jews truly believe that God did appear to them as the Angelos Theos, as the angel of the Lord. So whether you want to
which persons who believe were contemporary with the stories?
What do you mean? Where in the Old Testament?
That's what I'm talking about.
What are you talking about, John? You need to ask a question.
Jews today, I sure wish I had all the time, because I've got so much ignorance to.
We got plenty of time here.
You know, the Jews of today don't count.
I'm not talking about the Jews of today. I am not. I'm talking about ancient Jews.
Would you have me on air without William one of these days? Because I could tell so much more. I used to believe as William did. I know how to answer the minutiae. There's all kinds of that. I'm talking about
that would be a dream for you.
Things. I want your readers to read my book and find out for themselves how he is distorting things.
I want them to go.
He says he read it, but he's blinded.
I want you all.
You can't trust.
I want everybody to purchase the book. I want people to purchase your book, John. And I got to say, you guys got to go to the chapter. It is really the gold gem of the book. The chapter on the resurrection. I know you told. Number one, everybody, don't dismiss John. His arguments have to be answered. This book got an endorsement from Bart Ehrman. This book got a ringing endorsement from Bart Ehrman, and yet tonight the arguments have been put under fire, and they have not been able to survive, because we recognize that none of the arguments. It's a mere vision. It is a mere vision.
Would you stop saying that, because you're using up space by saying my arguments have been defeated? Blah blah blah.
Ask me a question.
You stop saying that, because you're using up my cross-examined time. All right.
Ask me a question.
Add up all the times you've said, "Well, I've debated him and I've destroyed him," and that takes up 10 minutes of every debate. Now listen.
Ask me a question. Ask me a question.
My turn. You said at the outset that this debate is not about the ascension and not about inerrancy. It definitely is. It's about inerrancy, because you believe would you please? Because you believe the Bible is inerrant, I suppose. Now, if not, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but that is, it's authoritative. And so you believe the Bible, basically. I know you're a Catholic, so you believe other things, but you believe the Bible is historically accurate, and that's the end of the story. You're like doubting Thomas. I believed, and it's a virtue because I believe, even though I don't have any objective evidence. And it's also about the ascension, because if Jesus rose from the dead, where is he now? I mean, like, otherwise he had to die again, right? So he didn't die again, so he had to ascend. Now, where was he ascending to, and where did it stop? In the Old and the New Testament, they believed that there was a heaven above the clouds. You see, that's where all the angels and God on his throne, and that's where Jesus came down from. It says God came down, and he took Elijah back up in the heaven on chariot, and Enoch as well, because there were like a lot of going back and forth from heaven to earth. And so Jesus went back into heaven, is what it says, bodily. Now, what happened to his body, it would be a problem if he were resurrected and left his body behind. So he had to take his body with him. So if he took his body with him in the ascension, and then there's no heaven, then is he still floating somewhere? Is he still out of space somewhere? Where is Jesus's body now?
Okay, let me answer that. We're told that Christ reigns bodily in heaven with the Father. He sits at the right hand of the Father. So we believe that Christ is bodily risen. he has a physical body in heaven as well. So where would the body be? The body would be in heaven. And we don't believe that he merely rose from the dead and left and could have left the body back. We mean body and soul, he rose from the dead. John, you can keep laughing all you want. And I never try to interrupt you. We have a 1 second lag.
It's an involuntary reflex.
Okay, John, I want the audience to know one thing. We have a 1 second lag. My connection is 1 second lag. And I begin talking. I'm not trying to interrupt you. I just want the audience to know that. And number two, you pontificate a lot. You pontificate a lot. So I then think, well, maybe he wants me to answer that as if it's a question. So I've just told you where the body was. Now ask me another question. I don't want you to think that I'm taking up your time.
Or if that's okay, thank you. I like the pause. It makes me feel like this is a reasonable debate. And I just want to experience this for a second here. Okay. Now, if Jesus's body is in heaven, right now, the same one that he was resurrected from, which you say
glorified body,
the bodily resurrection, which means it's the same one but glorified of the one that he walked the earth in. Then why did he have to ascend at all? I mean, why if all of a sudden poof he could be in heaven, because heaven obviously is not up there. The reason why he had to ascend in heaven, according to the story, is because the question came up, well, where is Jesus now? And so that in a vision, I'm suspecting, because they had visions all over the place, that someone came up with this visionary idea that, well, maybe Luke did. He said, well, he ascended into heaven. How do you know this? Well, I heard it in a vision, just like Revelation chapter 2 and 3. So, well, is there any basis for that other than your vision? No. But Jesus had to have ascended into heaven, because otherwise, where's his body? And they didn't have a clue that there's no heaven above there. There's no heaven. Do you think there's a heaven in the sky, William?
You want me to answer that for you? Everything you just said. Okay. Number one, the reason he ascended was to show his glory and power. In the prophecy in the Old Testament of Daniel being of Christ being the Son of Man of the book of Daniel, he had to ascend. Number two, he did not ascend merely to show them, oh, well, look, that they didn't insert that to say, well, look, that is where the actual physical body must be. No, they believe that he existed before he ever even became incarnate. John 1:1, at the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. They believed he existed before he even became incarnate. They believed that he was the angel of the Lord of the Old Testament. So none of that was needed to be injected, because before all of that, they believed he was God Almighty. Number three, do I believe that God reigns way, way, way up there? I have no idea where the celestial heaven, which the Bible talks about, would be. I don't know where it would be. So
of course you know. Hey,
I don't think anybody would know where that is, John.
So now, tell me this: do you believe in the incarnation? I mean, like, do you believe that Jesus is God-man, and that is inseparable, and you can't separate God-man, and therefore the Jesus of earth, the fleshly Jesus, is now reigning with the two other members of the Trinity? So you got a fleshly human being named Jesus who's attached to the hip at the second person of the Trinity. So you got the first, second, third person of the Trinity, plus this human flesh type person, Jesus, the sinless one, who can't go to hell because he was sinless. So he has to be in heaven, and he can't be separated from the second person of the Trinity because of the incarnation, and that he rose up into the sky somewhere where they all live happily and merrily like they used to.
Let me answer that for you. I think that your understanding of the Trinity is a distorted one. I don't think you understand anything of the doctrine of the Trinity. So the way you described our Lord and Savior in the incarnate sense is very incorrect. It's even heretical. The Bible says that Christ descended into the underworld. So his physical body didn't give him any kind of limitations, because it's not a physical you called him a human person, because his physical body is not a physical body like ours. It is a glorified, real, actual, tangible body. So of course it was different. It did not have the limitations of our bodies. Paul even says that he was raised in a glorified body. He's talking about an actual fleshly body. So yes, I believe in the incarnation. This is not a debate about the incarnation. I'd love to have one about the incarnation, though.
Not me. I don't want to hear more of your evasions.
You love me, don't you, John?
You frustrate me. I know. Don't I frustrate you? Wouldn't you?
Not in the least bit, my friend. You don't frustrate me one bit. But I appreciate the conversation, though.
Okay. All right. Let's go ahead and start the timer for our closing statements to 5-minute closing statements. And 1 second. I'm almost there. Okay, William, you're first to go for your closing statement. 5 minutes. Let me know when you're ready.
I'm listening.
Okay, I will begin now. Thank you very much for that, John. I greatly appreciate that. As everybody, I don't want anybody to think that that I don't like John. We're very good friends. We talk very often. But I do want people to get this book, because you need to look at what I consider to be the who's who of elite atheists. A bunch of them pitched in and they wrote this book. It has a glowing endorsement for Bart Ehrman. And I don't say it to be rude or mean, but there's tons of errors in here. We've seen them tonight. The book, we're talking about the resurrection only. So on that chapter in the resurrection, we're told all sorts of things. Well, you know what? It couldn't have been bodily. Yet tonight we've noticed that everything that we've read shows the massive, overwhelming consensus shows us, without a shadow of a doubt, Paul was arguing that the Christ rose in an actual physical body, glorified body. We're told the word spiritual means it can't be a real body. But 1 Corinthians 10 is talking, what is Paul talking about? He's talking about the book of Exodus. He's talking about the event in the Exodus. What is occurring there? Go to Exodus 17:4. Compare the Greek. Look at it. And then go to 1 Corinthians 10. Tell me if Paul is referring to the historical rock. Did the rock sometime become made out of spiritual matter? Did it? Look at the way the text is exegeted. Go back, rewind the debate, and look at it. Paul was connecting poma, broma, soma. 3 rhyming words, all of them in the manner of spiritual. All of it was in the actual physical manner. All of it was talking about a real body that he rose from. All of it. How was water changed to be not water? How was the manna not physical? How is spiritually, definitionally, neither of these definitions of spiritual? Spiritual is real and tangible. How can it be anything but that? 1 Corinthians 10 gives us that clue. That is why John did not want to exegete it. That is why he avoided the exegesis of that. He couldn't do it. He said, well, you know what, William, you're dealing with minutia. You're dealing with details that are not important. How can they not be important? How? If they're in his very book. He's telling you in his book that these are the arguments that rip the resurrection apart. If you read his book, I want you to know right now, I'm going to his book. I am not dealing with minutia. Every time I debate John, I'm told that everything I'm dealing with is minutia. But if you open up his book, we are told that this is look, the resurrection never took place. Look at that. And because of the arguments today, we're told it didn't. Well, spiritual must mean, symbolic. Where? Then I'm told I'm arguing with minutia. Where on earth is that? How? Why is that minutia? If the arguments are from his very book. I told him that every ancient source interpreted 1 Corinthians 11 and 1 Corinthians 15 to mean that Christ, the bodily risen Christ, gave that to Paul. Said, where in 1 Corinthians 11 is the visionary text? It's not there. It is not there. It's a bit of fun back and forth banter between John and me. John says, I'm going to give you a master class in Greek. I tell him I'm going to beat him in the debate. We're good friends. We have been for many years. Easter or Christmas, I tell him Merry Christmas. He tells me Happy Easter. He's a very good friend of mine. I don't want people to think here, well, this has devolved into real hatred. No, I will continue being John's friend until, God willing, one day I can go to Mass and worship with John on my right hand or on my left-hand side, because I love him and I care for him. And I want him to believe that Christ is truly risen, but not in a spiritual kind of way, that they only believe that he was only risen in a symbolic kind of way. He's bodily risen. That is what we need to be talking about all throughout this Easter season. That is what we have to argue with vigor, with intensity, and with spiritual love, a true, real love. Because at the end of the day, all of the evidence is rock solid. All of it. Over 500 witnesses were told. We know of early people that knew the apostles, were taught and trained by the apostles. Polycarp, we're told from Irenaeus, even dialogued with some of the eyewitnesses. All of this is just on and on. The evidence is mind-blowing. And because of that, we know our Lord and Savior is risen. He is bodily risen indeed. Thank you very much for your time.
Okay, so 5 minutes, restarting the clock. John, you have 5-minute closing statement whenever you're ready.
Okay. Yeah, have you ever had a friend that's annoying? so there's a little bit of that between us, I would guess. My point is that the only witness to the resurrection of Jesus that counts, since there's no prophecy of a resurrection, is Paul. And that Paul, anyone who is honest and reads through Acts, and especially 1 Corinthians, 2 Corinthians as well, and Galatians, will find, and those are the earlier ones, his earlier disciples or correspondents, he's a visionary. So why would I trust that we can tell between the factual statements and the supposed factual ones, and the visions and the dreams that he had? And if that's the only testimony we have, right? And he sometimes flirts into visions and dreams and back and forth again. Sometimes he knows that, okay, now I'm just sharing you a vision, and other times he says, well, this I know. All of that is quite unreliable, and it doesn't matter if he had a polycarp. Just like if Joseph Smith had an Elijah. I mean, none of that matters, you see. There's no prophecy of a resurrection, and you have Paul. And he's not a very reliable witness. We want to cross-examine him and those people he says are witnesses, the list of disciples and apostles that he says in 1 Corinthians 15 and the 500. We want to investigate for ourselves. We can't take his words as evidence that would convince a reasonable person that I sank 18 holes in one in a row and also took up wings and flew from T to T as I did so. There's just no reasonable person would do that, because what we're talking about is not just an extraordinary event of sinking 18 holes in one, but we're talking about a miraculous event that is doing that while flying, like Superman would do. No reasonable person would believe one person, much less a person of Paul's character. None. Now, he can talk about all the evidence he wants in the Old Testament and what the Jews believed or didn't believe. It doesn't matter, because it's coming down to the resurrection, something the Jews rejected overwhelmingly. They believed in God. They believed in prophecy. They were looking for the Messiah, and yet they didn't believe in Jesus. Overwhelming numbers of them. There's 8 million Jews, it's conjectured, reasonably conjectured, in the Mediterranean world at the time. 2 million, I think, living in Palestine, and yet only at the end of the first century had 1,000 Jews been converted to Christianity. So argues Catholic scholar David Sim. I have that in my book. So why would the Jews overwhelmingly reject this Messiah? Now, some would say, well, that's because they didn't want to accept Jesus as the Messiah. But then who authored the prophecy, the so-called prophecies themselves? Well, it has to be the Old Testament God. Well, then why didn't he care for his favored people by telling them, giving them some sign, some clue that would convince more than 1,000 people of Jesus by the end of the first century? I mean, surely that's evidence all by itself, if nothing else, that God did not write the prophecies well enough that they could believe. And so apparently he didn't. The evidence shows that he didn't. I mean, if that's the case. But more than likely, the Jews rejected Jesus as their Messiah legitimately based on reason, because the prophecies don't point to Jesus. The prophecies point to, like in Isaiah, the suffering servant, the people of Israel. The prophecies point to other things, or they were just guesses or hunches or even hopes. A hope is not a prophecy. And the prophesy of Jesus being born of a virgin, that's misconstrued. I think William knows this. It's the wrong word being quoted in Matthew of the virgin. It's not the word used in Isaiah. So the prophecies don't point to Jesus, and there's none about the resurrection, even if they do point somewhat to Jesus. And all we have is Paul. I submit to you that's just not enough, especially when we're talking about believing that I sank 18 holes in one in a row on a standard golf course and flew from tee to tee.
All right, gentlemen. Thank y'all for that very lively debate. Now let's go to our question and answer period. Everybody go ahead and send some questions. Super chats will be asked first. Also, if you want to call 1-800-484-3801, I will take live questions via the phone. And then also, if you're going to put it in the chat, make sure to put it to @Reason and Theology, and then let me know who the question is for. I see one on here for John, and thank you, Ryan, for the super chat. Would you agree a resurrection would have to be physical within a Jewish context?
No, I don't know what I think. I think that there are different interpretations. Liberals talk about the Easter event, and there are plenty of them, and they simply say, well, we're just going to call it the Easter event, the event that changed the lives of the disciples, and leave it at that. I'm not sure what they believe. Some, like Bishop Spong, he says it's a spiritual body. Richard Carrier, atheist, says it's a spiritual body. Robert Connor argues that what the disciples saw were ghosts. In fact, the word ghost does appear in one or two of the Gospels. They say, I think at the end of Luke, they say they're seeing a ghost, or he looks like a ghost. So, and ghost literature was plentiful in the surrounding Greco-Roman world. So I'm not sure. I'm not going to say I'm not going to try to decide between those. But the idea of a physical resurrection, however, faces a lot of philosophical objections. Like if you can replicate just simply the body, a dead body, then we have some objections as to, well, if you can replicate one body, well, then how about replicating another body, the same kind, like years later? I can get into that, but I didn't in the chapter in my book here. So I don't see any reason to think that I don't care to know the answer to that question, because we already know that we're basing everything on the testimony of Paul, who is unreliable.
Thank you, DJ Next, for the super chat. He says, thank you to everyone who put in the hard work to make this debate happen. God bless you. By the way, William, real quick, did you want to interact with that? Very briefly.
Yeah. I think John was referring to the Gospel of Luke, where they say they think they saw a ghost. I think it was that. But clearly, if you look at the context, they're talking about it's nighttime, so they can't really see very well. So that was the context of it. So it wasn't a resurrection account. What was the other thing that he brought up? Yeah, I agree with the person that asked the question. Without even arguing the resurrection of Christ, if we look at the Old Testament, resurrection was always of the physical, bodily nature. So Ryan, I think was the name of the person. You're spot on there.
The next one is for you, William. Given that there is only New Testament evidence for the resurrection, is that enough evidence to objectively prove or support the case for the resurrection?
Yeah, I think it is enough, and I think that. Well, of course, we're only going to have New Testament if we're talking about the Bible. We're not going to have the Old Testament. But the Old Testament, we do have prophecies. We have the prophecy of the suffering servant in Isaiah 52:53. What is incredible there is talking about a singular person. He's disfigured. He is cut off from the land of the living. He dies, but yet he prolongs his days. He continues to live. What else could that be talking about? Other than a bodily, physical resurrection? Outside of the New Testament, we have very early testimony testifying to it in the Apostolic Fathers of Clement of Rome, Ignatius of Antioch, Polycarp. So I think that we do have strong evidence that does back that up.
All right. And, well, let me ask another one for you here, William. Well, if John is back.
Was I supposed to respond to something? He responded.
If you wanted to interact with that, you could. Up to you, though. Yeah, okay. Gregory asks a question for you. Does John know about the Shroud of Turin and Eucharistic miracles? Would scientific analysis be acceptable to him?
Joe Nickel is known as a paranormal detective, and he's written extensively on the Shroud of Turin. I mean, the dating is bad. I think 1400s, 1200. I mean, I'm not really up on that. It's not evidence. The figure's head is way too big for its body. The torso is too long. I mean, it's obviously, and the blood is not blood, the so-called blood, but pigmentation. So, you know, I don't regard that at all. But Joe Nickel, he wrote a chapter for me on the Shroud. I think it's a definitive chapter in my anthology, Christianity in the Light of Science. And so I recommend you look that up, or just go straight to his books and things.
William, did you want to interact with that?
Yeah, even if I did believe in the Shroud of Turin, I would be hesitant to use that as evidence when dialoguing with my friend John or anybody else. Not that I don't think it's valuable. I would rather talk about the Shroud completely alone in a whole show, or even debate that topic. But I think that, of course, I disagree with everything John said about the Shroud, but that is it's a topic for a whole other day.
William, can you give a clear example of an Old Testament prophecy that was uniquely fulfilled by Christ?
Sure. If we look at Psalm 16, which is the famous one of King David, and I'm bringing that one up because I know my friend John brings it up in the book. I believe that is clearly a messianic prophecy talking about the Messiah that would come. He would die, yet he would not suffer corruption. It's quoted in the book of Acts. That clearly is referring to Christ. Remember, in the Old Testament, the Messiah is called David a number of times, comes from the lineage of David. So the Messiah suffers. We can't be talking about David. He's talking about somebody that dies, is not left to corrupt in the underworld. Remember, in the context, underworld is always about somebody who's died. And then they're not left there to corrupt, and that is then fulfilled in Christ. I also believe Isaiah 52, 53, Wisdom 2, and many others. But to answer real quickly, that one is one.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
I don't have the ability to look up Bible passages as quick as he does, but Psalm 16 is clear, I think, from memory, is that David was praying. He was on death's bed, and he prayed for resuscitation, whatever. It's not about Jesus. And in Isaiah chapter 49, verse 3, I asked my wife just a minute ago to pull up that quote. That's one quote. I don't have a separate phone. The New International Version says in Isaiah, he said to me, "You are my servant, Israel, in whom I will display my splendor." Again, you are my servant, Israel, in whom I will display my splendor. And throughout the rest of chapter 49 into chapter 3, he's talking about a suffering servant. It's plain as day, the context. And it's not just that verse. That's just the most obvious one, the most clear one. It's plain as day that is a reference to the people of Israel who are suffering, who suffer under Babylonian captivity, and that they come back as a remnant. So I think that's all I got to say about that.
All right, one more for each. To John, if Isaiah 53 is a prophecy of Israel, how do you explain the context provided in Isaiah 52, 13 through 15 about the suffering servant?
I just did. Here's the thing. If you want me to bring out my Bible, I think I either sold or gave away or burned. I didn't really do that. I gave my Bibles away. All I have is a digital version, and I have my wife's phone, and I don't like her phone. So if you want to have a Bible study with me, I could be more than happy to do that. It's just not right here. The context is Isaiah 49, verse 3, and it's clear that Israel is God's servant, and it's clear the context is 2nd Isaiah, and you have to understand why it's 2nd Isaiah. It's because things like Cyrus mentioned in those pages couldn't have come from any other time but the time of Cyrus, when he released the Jews from Persia after they had conquered the Babylonians. So otherwise, it's just nonsensical. It'd be like saying that King Josiah was predicted 300 years in advance to have destroyed the shrines to Baal, and then all of a sudden, voila! 300 years later, a guy named Josiah, king named Josiah, comes and destroys the shrines of Baal, which actually is the case in the Bible. So that stuff is nonsense. It's clearly rewriting. It's clearly writing prophecy to retrofit it to current day. So that's why there's a second Isaiah, and that's why second Isaiah is referring to the sufferings that the Jews are undergoing right now, and that's also the cause for the hopes for a Messiah, and it only happened then and not before.
William, did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, well, I think that if you look at the context of Isaiah 49:3, it's talking about a singular person. The term Israel is used for the Messiah in multiple places. He's used for in a personal sense more than one time in the Bible. So if the suffering Messiah is dying for the sins of Israel, it can't be Israel. I think it's very clear. I think that, and of course that would be a topic for a whole other day. But I think it's really important that contextually, if you look at it, everything you look at content, you see, for you shall not go out with haste, nor by flight, for the Lord will go before you, and the God of Israel will be your rear guard. Why not say the guard of you, Israel? Or, you know, it just doesn't make any sense contextually.
There's a guy. There was a guy named Israel. You know, he was Jacob.
Sure, I realize
he was named Israel. But it became the term for all 12 tribes. You know,
sure.
Later on in time, Israel meant the people of God.
Sure. You actually find, if you go to medieval era, you find some Jews then using, it's very, very late though, then recognizing and saying what John said, but it's very late. The earliest Jewish interpretations recognize that to be messianic, and the only way it could make sense is if it is messianic, because the individual actually dies. It's talking about a person dying, and then his days go onward. He continues his life. But again, like I said, the very suffering servant itself and that prophecy is a topic for a whole other day. I would be willing to debate that topic alone.
All right, last question for William. The doubting Thomas story was claimed a couple times in the debate to be obviously fabricated. What is your response to that specific claim?
If it was fabricated, which I argue that it is not, it really wouldn't matter, because we were dealing with what John and myself agreed to be the oldest evidence being the Pauline, the Proto-Pauline, not even Deutero-Pauline. And by virtue of that, we recognize the everything in that historical document shows us the bodily resurrection is historical, is true. But on the issue of doubting Thomas, I don't think that is fabricated, because we've got that there in the Gospel of John, and we have it being recorded. You look at the earliest testimonies of the earliest followers and the earliest followers of Christ, and they all testify to that actually having happened.
Did you have a follow-up, John?
Yeah, I don't know that that's mentioned anywhere else but in the last part of the Gospel of John. I think it's the only place we find it, and usually that's an indication that it's unique to John and therefore less reliable. But I think that's a fair question that you were asked, and I think you blew it. I think it does matter. I think it doesn't matter a lot. You said it doesn't matter. It matters a lot because it tells us what the early disciples were doing. This is specifically the Gospel of John, which was the last gospel, and clearly he was hitchhiking on the earlier gospels. And that is, belief matters, not evidence. It's clear. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 1 says, faith is the substance of things hoped for. That's not evidence, it's faith. Faith, not evidence. So throughout, if you believe, you'll be saved. So faith for the disciples and the early Christians was more important than objective evidence. So it matters a lot.
I do agree in the wider context, John, that it does matter. I meant in terms of tonight's debate, in the wider context, I do agree that it matters. That's why I do argue that it is historical and did happen.
I see one more super chat on here. How does John explain the empty tomb? If you want to take a stab at that one.
There was no empty tomb in Paul's. chapter 15. I mean, here's the thing: the earliest testimony. Look, apologists love to say, where's Jesus? What about the empty tomb? In fact, that's probably, apart from a couple of other questions, key questions, that's probably one of the top questions that apologists will say. Well, what about the empty tomb? And then if you can't explain the empty tomb, and so therefore, blah, 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 Jesus rose from the dead. Well, there's a number of explanations for, if there was an empty tomb, why it was empty. And one of them could be simply that they thought they went to the wrong tomb. They didn't. The soldiers had seen the disciples carry Jesus's body off to put in the empty tomb, but along the way, soldiers, took them and said, "Now we want you to carry our backpacks for us. Throw that carcass aside," because they had no regard for Jews. So they had to do what the soldiers did. They threw the carcass aside, and along the way, the soldiers then killed the two Jews. So all of a sudden, nobody knew where it was. So the empty tomb was empty because of that. I mean, there's certain reasons. The other thing is this: the story of the empty tomb grew, it evolved until you get to Thomas, the doubting Thomas. I mean, if you look at the stories at the end of the Gospels, first used to Mary and Martha, they went and told no one. Well, why would they go and tell no one? Out of fear. That's the end of the story. And people have conjectured that the reason why the Gospel of Mark ends that way, they were afraid and told no one, is because that the empty tomb story was created for the first time. And somebody would say, in the church, as they received the Gospel of Mark, well, what's this about this empty tomb? Well, I've never heard about that before. But in this Gospel, it says, see, he was here, but he's risen, was concocted to introduce the empty tomb story. And so that's why it ends the way it does. And that's why the ending of Mark, verse 9 through the end, had to supply the details of the empty tomb and the resurrection appearances and this, that, and the other, which was fabricated, plagiarized. And then Luke explained about it. He added a massive rock, not just a rock, and then John, Jesus eats fish. And then, of course, the doubting Thomas story. I won't believe unless I can see and touch his hands. You see an evolutionary progress from Paul, who doesn't mention the one question that everybody who's an apologist in today's world asks all the time. Why didn't he? Because he didn't know anything of it. According to Paul, either he was a ghost or something else, or maybe a spiritual being. Paul would have mentioned it, since what he was doing was giving all the evidence he could consider for why Jesus is to be believed to have resurrected from the dead, and never said anything about this.
William, follow up there.
Yeah, a lot that was said there, but I didn't even rely on the gospel. So whether or not the longer ending isn't viable, which, by the way, I believe the longer ending, there's a lot of evidence for it. It's a topic for a whole other day. But I didn't even use Mark. And John would argue Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John are later. So I stuck to the earliest. And we look at the earliest. We look at Paul, and we clearly have a bodily resurrection there. But if we talk about the empty tomb, just looking at the book of Acts, we're clearly told there that we're given a distinction, as I said in my opening statement, between David and Christ. David still being with the people and still present, them having his tomb and him having undergone the rotting process, undergone the corruption process. Yet Christ is no longer in the tomb; he's bodily risen, and so there's a clear distinction being made there. They truly believe that the tomb was empty. I know John does not believe that, but I think all of the evidence is very overwhelming that indeed the tomb was empty and Christ did indeed bodily rise from the dead.
You're not talking. You shouldn't use the word evidence there.
I presented plenty for you tonight.
You should say all the hearsay testimonial evidence.
Well, it wouldn't be hearsay if there were eyewitnesses. So we've got actual eyewitnesses. So we have eyewitnesses. We've got eyewitnesses.
Use that word as if they're on a witness stand swearing on the Bible, and you can cross-examine them. We cannot cross-examine them.
In your perfect world, John, the kind of evidence that you want is not there. But the kind of evidence that is needed, the kind of evidence that, but in your perfect worldview, John, we can doubt the existence of anyone. I mean, you can even doubt the existence of me in your kind of worldview, John. So
no, that's an absolute mischaracterization.
We have enough evidence, I believe, and we have it in Paul, and we have it in the followers of Paul and the first followers of Christ.
You have hearsay testimonial evidence from, or you have testimonial evidence from some wacko, a person who claims to have seen Jesus and heard voices from him and saw visions and dreams.
Well, I believe that those are eyewitnesses. There's nothing indicative of it being a mere vision. All of the language being used there is of an actual physical person.
Even though Paul and the book of Joel, and as quoted in Acts chapter 2, and the spiritual gifts all say otherwise.
They do not say otherwise, and we didn't prove it tonight.
Well, gentlemen, I want to thank y'all both for being on. I want to give each of you an opportunity to put in a plug for anything that you wanted to. William, beginning with you.
Yeah, let me go ahead and begin. John, thank you very much. I had a great time here dialoguing with my good friend John. I love it. I love dialoguing with John. For people here that are wondering, again, people think, hey, you guys really go with each other. Hey, we always go with each other. Well, there when we debated in Dallas, we went at each other. We had a great time. John is my buddy. Yet we sat there and we had beers together. We're good friends. We will remain good friends. And as far as what I'm doing, well, just debating a lot, working on new books, working on new blog articles. I will be go check out my blog. I will be putting out a blog detailing every argument used tonight, spiritual, all of those arguments brought up line by line. So if John wants to go visit that and try and tear that down, even though he won't be able to, he's very welcome to do that. But everybody, thank you for tuning in. And John, I had a great time, my friend, and look forward to hearing your closing plug.
And John, did you want to put in a plug for anything?
Yeah, I just want to say that he doesn't understand what evidence is. I'll just say that. And I think I talk about what that involves, in this book. And if you're an honest seeker of truth, you need to read it from the horse's mouth, if you will, because if all you ever read was the Gospel of John as an example that was written so that you might believe, then all you might want to read is what William says, because he's no different than the Gospel of John, and in the sense that he's doing what he does because he believes just like they did for less than objective evidence, which I think I've shown. But my latest book's coming out, one I'm pretty proud of, is called Varieties of Jesus Mythicism, edited with Robert Price. It'll give you the various theories of how the Jesus story originated if the conservative views are rejected. Once you say, well, that story isn't credible, then how did the Jesus story originate? That's a really good book called Varieties of Jesus Mythicism. And the last book, and I'm done. I'm done writing. I'm done editing. That'll be my 13th book in 13 years. I think 13 is a good number. And then my last book then would be called God and Horrendous Suffering. And I like the blurbs I'm getting for it. I like the authors that are writing for it. Stephen Law wrote the foreword, and I'm getting blurbs from Norman Geisler's son David, and Randall Rouser, and Chad Meister. If you know of him, he edited the book called The Cambridge Companion to the Problem of Evil. He wrote a blurb for this book of mine on God and Horrendous Suffering. So it's a dandy, and and then I'm done writing and maybe done debating. I don't know. I really don't like this. But thanks for having me on.
Thank y'all, and I apologize. There was one more super chat that I didn't see. If y'all wanted to make any comments on it, why would monotheistic Jews believe in something they would be persecuted for? Why would the apostles of people believe in Judas of all places? Did y'all have any thoughts on that?
Well, they didn't. They didn't. Catholic scholar David Sim looked at the evidence. There's an article. I quoted it in my book, and you can look it up. You can find it online. He said, as far as we can tell, only 1,000 Jews converted as Christians by the end of the first century. And that's in a sea of 8 million Jews in the known world. So they didn't.
All right. William, very quickly, any comments?
Yeah, really quickly. I think we did have a number of people converting. They were being killed. They were being martyred for the faith. So we had people that were converting. We don't know the exact number, but plenty were converting. By the time we get to the 1st, 2nd, 3rd century, by the time we get to already the Council of Nicaea, we read of all the people that are wounded and have all these war kind of like war wounds on them when they're there at the council. It shows you that they were used to living lives as martyrs. So we'll never know truly how many did truly convert to the faith, but we know plenty did.
All right. Again, gentlemen, thank y'all both for being on. And, I know, John, you say you might not be doing any more debates, but if you are interested in the future, we'd love to have you back on.
I'll bring them back.
I might if I want to flagellate myself.
Right. All right. Well, y'all just let me know. Again, thank y'all, gentlemen, for both being on, and everybody, thank you for watching. Don't forget to, of course, comment, like, and subscribe. Share this on your social media, your Facebook, your Twitter. And as I always say, check us out, patreon.com/Reason and Theology if you want to support us and also find extra content from the Reason and Theology channel. Until next time, God bless you all.